So there's an element in the story tonight that we are not going to talk about because we've already dealt with it. And that is the class 2 weeks ago that Alan Mosley taught where we had a multiple wives situation with Jacob and Leah and Rachel. And we talked in that class about when a spouse feels unloved. And there's a little bit of that in the story tonight, although it's not the emphasis. Okay, so just getting that out at the beginning to say, I know that that's an element here, and we will touch on that, but that's not a focus tonight. We are talking tonight about Hannah and the challenges that she dealt with in particular, but also, of course, her husband, Elkanah, as they were navigating infertility, childlessness, barrenness is the biblical word. So, I think this class, this story, this chapter is one that you're familiar with, but we're emphasizing a particular element of this. The subtitle of this lesson is Dealing with Challenges That You Cannot Control, okay? We're going to emphasize that element tonight. We're not talking about challenges of marriage that you brought upon yourselves through a series of bad choices or something. No, that's not our emphasis tonight. We may have another class on that later. But tonight is about things that are outside of us and beyond our ability to deal with. And of course, with Hannah, we're talking about her childlessness. So we're not going to read much tonight because I think this is a story that you're familiar with. But I do want us to think about the first several verses of 1 Samuel chapter 1, how this book begins. So we are introduced to Elkanah in verse 1. Some people say Elkanah. He has 2 wives, it says in verse 2. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. I don't care how you say it. I don't know what's right. Your guess is as good as mine. So when you make comments tonight, man, just whatever you say it confidently, okay? All right, so he's got these 2 wives. Peninnah had children, verse 2 says, but Hannah had no children. Now, Peninnah has children, so she must have more than one. Okay, there are some things in the text that seem to clearly indicate that. Hannah has none. In fact, in verse 4, talking about Peninnah, it says, to all her sons and her daughters. Okay, so she clearly has more than one. And Hannah does not. Now, I want you to look at the first question on your handout. What thing or things do you see Hannah dealing with that are beyond her ability to control or affect? Now, clearly there's one that we all immediately think of, and that is she has no child. Yeah, she is barren, okay? She has no ability to control that, okay? We'll come back to that one in just a moment. But do you see anything else in these first 9 verses of the chapter that are a source of problem and pain for her that she has no control over? Sarah? Yeah.
They're called rivals. Her rival treated her badly, and then also like how her husband who loves her, so he gets her double. So it's like it's like when you tell your parents something's wrong and they go take care of it for you, and then they treat you worse because they took care of it for you. Like he's giving her extra, and that's not something she controls. Now that lady's bitter and mad and treats her worse because it's just a whole triangle.
Okay. So not only does she have the problem of not being able to have children, but she also has this other woman who's kind of a thorn in her side, right? Notice what it says about the way she is treated by Peninnah. If you look at verse 6, it says that her rival, okay, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her. In verse 7, it happened year after year, as often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her. Have you ever known somebody like that? Who was always trying to get under other people's skin? always trying to cause problems and, be rude and be hostile and provoke you to, maybe not you, but maybe it was you, but they are always being provocative. They're trying to stir up trouble. Man, don't you hate people like that? And yet Hannah is living alongside this woman. And what does it say is the primary reason that Peninnah would provoke Hannah? And because why? Over what?
And why can't you just be happy with the multiple children you clearly
Over the fact that Hannah has no children. What a jerk, right? I mean, that's how we would talk about her. How terrible that she would do this. Hannah has no control over that. She can't control how she is treated by this other woman. She cannot control her barrenness. The text says twice. Did you notice in verse 5 and in verse 6, it says, the Lord had closed her womb. Now that's interesting, and I did a lot of reading on that idea and how people understand that. And there are some differences in opinion of what this means. There are some who say, okay, God closed her womb in the sense that he purposefully withheld children from her because providentially he was working out something later, which we know as the story goes on is a child. And God is bringing her through this difficult time because in the end, he's going to bring about rejoicing. So it was an intentional thing. God did not want her to have a child until he did. Okay? Then there are others who say, no, it's not really that idea. It's more just stating an observation. God didn't bless her with a child. So if you remember in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 1, Eve gets pregnant and she has Abel, and she said, Cain, thank you. She says, I have gotten a man-child from the Lord. God blessed me with a child. It's just, she just didn't have one yet. I don't really have a strong opinion on it, okay, as to what you think about it or what I think about it. I will give you this, though. The expression is used only one other time. It's in Genesis, and it's in chapter 20. Let's go look at it real quick. Genesis chapter 20 is the only other time this expression is used. Now, it is not the only other time that this idea is conveyed of God withholding children, okay? That's not the only time the idea is conveyed. But in Genesis chapter 20, when Abraham and Abimelech are going through that little thing where Abraham once again, lies about who Sarah is. And okay, so then chapter 20, verse 18, for the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. The Lord closed, that's intentional, it's purposeful. He stopped them from producing because of what was happening. Maybe that's what it means in the case of Hannah. I don't really have a strong opinion on that, but I do want us later in the class to talk more about how we understand this idea and how we might interpret this in our own life as we deal with some challenges, and that'll become clearer in just a moment. Okay, throughout chapter 1, you are told the story of the domestic interaction of this family. Elkanah, Peninnah, Hannah. How is Elkanah described? What kind of man does he seem to be? From chapter 1. Dad? Okay, verse 8, you read as an indication of him being unsympathetic.
He's saying, why do you need children? I'm your husband.
Okay.
I'm better than 10 sons.
Okay, all right. That's interesting because, see, not everybody reads it that way, right? And okay, you're right. There are some commentators who say, man, Elkanah, he just really comes across as, brutish here when he says, hey, I'm good enough, right? Why can't you be happy with me? And there are others who say, no, this is more of a sympathetic kind of, so again, I don't know. I don't really have a strong opinion on that. This idea, though, of 10 sons, Am I not better to you than 10 sons? That's not a random thought. Where in the scripture have you read about someone having 10 sons, which eventually became 12? Jacob, right? Okay, think about this. This is interesting. And I don't know if this is coincidence or if this is providence or what, but this is interesting. Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. Leah starts having all the children. Rachel is barren, right? Jacob loves Rachel. Leah not so much, but Leah has the children. Elkanah loves Hannah, but Peninnah has all the children. Okay, so there's an obvious parallel here in the story. Rachel, while barren, sees Jacob get 10 sons before she has her first one. Okay? So Leah and then Bilhah and Zilpah, the maids, 10 sons were born to Jacob before Rachel bears Joseph, the first one, her first one. Okay? So, in the end, Rachel does have sons, as does Hannah. So there's a lot of interesting connections between these two stories. How else is Elkanah described? He loved Hannah. All right, what else?
He gave her a worthy portion because he did love her.
All right, he gives her this additional portion. During what? What does he do year after year, the text talks about? Yeah, he goes up to sacrifice and worship. And yeah, I mean, he really comes across as this seemingly, godly and good husband, right? And I think, Dad, to your point about, well, I think he felt like maybe he was unsympathetic. I think there are some who say, no, it wasn't that, because look how he's described over here, early in the chapter, maybe, but it could be that that's right. Could be. David's going to settle that. Good.
I agree with Tim.
Do you? Okay.
He did great things, but he just kept his mouth shut. which we're talking about marriage. It's a good lesson for husbands.
All right. I'm not touching that one. Okay, Hannah. Let's think about her for a minute. Aside from her infertility, how else is she depicted in chapter 1? What'd you say?
Well,
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Poor me. Because of that, and it said that provoked her sorely.
Uh-huh.
She was easily, she was very sensitive to her condition.
Okay, interesting. Okay, all right. What else? Julie, what do you think?
That's interesting because I read her more as she's downhearted, but she's faithful. So she's
Okay, clearly that. Yes.
goes and prays and bitterness and has to say, I'm not drunk. I just want
Right.
a child so bad. I'll do
All right, so she's obviously a very faithful and pious woman. She's praying, it seems, regularly. She is greatly loved by her husband. And yes, she wants a child, but she also has a desire for the child, and she's going to do what is right for the child when the child comes, right? She says, God, if you give me a child, I'll give him back to you. All right? I mean, she's approaching this properly, okay? So I came across a quote. I'm sorry, it's on the next slide. So let me just mention this. Key concept number 1 for tonight. So that is, our marriage may be affected by things that are beyond our ability to control. Okay, it might be infertility. Might be. We're going to talk about some other issues a little bit later, but this is something that we all need to be aware of. Even if it's not infertility, there's a bunch of other kinds of issues that are outside our ability to control that could have an effect on our marriage. This is just one biblical example of this. So when Hannah is dealing with this, we've already talked about what is she dealing with. We talked about the provocation and then this infertility. But here's a quote from Bergen in the New American Commentary that I thought was really good. He says, in spite of, or perhaps because of, her infertility, Hannah was a woman of faith. In fact, Hannah is portrayed as the most pious woman in the Old Testament. I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure I agree with that. Maybe she is. She's certainly near the top of the list. That's an opinion statement. But continue on. Everything else he says I have no problem with. Here she is shown going up to the Lord's house. No other woman in the Old Testament is mentioned to do this. In addition, Hannah is the only woman shown making and fulfilling a vow to the Lord. She is also the only woman who is specifically said to pray. Her prayer is also among the longest recorded in the Old Testament. Furthermore, her prayer includes the most recorded utterances of Yahweh's name by a woman, 18 times. She is shown avoiding the faults of the first infertile covenant woman. Who would that be? The first infertile covenant woman. Sarah. Okay, Abraham and Sarah, all right. She is avoiding the faults of Sarah by seeking help from Yahweh rather than pursuing crafty schemes. Genesis 16, what was the crafty scheme that Sarah came up with? Hagar. Yeah, let's have children that way, okay? All right. She also avoided the fault of Jephthah, who likewise made a vow that separated him from his child. Whereas Jephthah gave his daughter as a burnt offering, Hannah gave her child as a living sacrifice when she gave him back to Eli for training. Okay, I thought this was really good. Lots of good things said about Hannah and the way that she lived. So, Hannah is this godly woman who desperately wants a child, but she does not, if you think about where we went before with Leah. Do you remember what Leah kept saying with her children? If I have this child, maybe, now my husband will love me, okay? Hannah's not doing that. She's not saying, well, if I have this child, then maybe Elkanah will love me. He already loves her. If I have this child, then, God, I'll never ask you for anything else. This is the only thing No, if you give me a child, I'll give him back to you. I will teach him to serve you. Very noble. Hannah's a very impressive woman. Now, Hannah was unable to have children until the Lord answered her prayers and blessed her with a son. Now, question number 3. Describe how Hannah must have felt despite the fact that she could not affect or control her inability to conceive. How do you think she felt? Sarah.
I feel like maybe because of the way she was being treated by the other wife.
Yeah, what was her name?
I would say China, but I don't care. Really whatever. The other wife. I feel like there's a little bit of cultural pressure for them to have male children in particular,
Sure.
but like a desperate wanting to be good enough, being a wife that would deliver children, like that's a cultural pressure. I just feel like that's part of why it's so devastating to her.
Okay. All right, good. What else?
I just feel, just the way Hannah treated her, that, I can't do anything about this, but you keep saying things to me, that kind of thing. And there are people that don't understand that sometimes, even today, how people feel when they can't.
Yeah. Do you think that, the text doesn't say this, okay, so this is conjecture, but do you think that maybe Hannah, because of the provocation of Peninnah, that maybe Hannah started to feel like, maybe she's right? Right? I mean, have you ever, you've interacted with people who are beaten down and bullied by others to the point that they begin to accept, gaslighting. That's the term. That's it. They begin to accept what is being said about them even when it's not true. Or in this case, even when there's nothing that can be done about it. Okay? Look at verse 7. Chapter 1, verse 7. She is provoked, and it says that she wept and she would not eat. She would go through periods where all she did was cry and she wouldn't eat. What do we call that today? Depression. Yeah. What about verse 10? You see similar language. Greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord, and wept bitterly. Now, remember that expression from verse 5 and verse 6, that the Lord closed her womb. I want us to go through a little, I don't know if it's an exercise, but I want to put a little chart up on the screen that might help us as we think about this idea and how best to understand this. The Lord closed her womb. I want to suggest that there might be a pendulum here that we could think about. On one extreme, on one side of this pendulum, Hannah might begin to think, well, God is against me. God clearly hates me or doesn't love me. He is withholding this joy because maybe he's angry with me. God is punishing me for something that I have done. Could you see how a person might come to that conclusion? Okay? And I don't just necessarily mean just Hannah. A woman today, if she's dealing with this, she might begin to think man, I've prayed about this, and I still don't have a child. God he doesn't want me to have one. He's against me. He's holding this over me. He's punishing me, something like that. I think you can see how a woman might begin to feel that way. On the other side, though, there might be a woman who says, after she reads this story, hey, God has promised me. Because after all, Hannah was barren, and she prayed, and she got her prayer answered. She got her child. And Sarah and Rachel and see? And if I just pray, and if I just have enough faith, God's promised me that this is all going to work out. Are either one of those things true? Okay. And yet, two people could read the same biblical story, whether it be Sarah or Hannah or whatever, and they could come to these conclusions. Okay? Yes.
I disagree.
Well, you're not allowed to do that.
I don't know if a person would say God is against me, that's what I'm not, maybe that verbiage I'm not liking. Maybe they would say, it's just the Lord's will that I don't have children. I'm not saying, I don't actually hear people saying God is against me, I'm not having children.
Well, okay, but remember, I said that this is a pendulum, or it's a spectrum. Okay? So I think what you said would be somewhere like right there. Let me keep talking, and then we'll see if I satisfy your dissatisfaction. Okay? All right. This is clearly a complex, and it's an emotional issue. Okay? Why is it that some married couples struggle to conceive? And the fact is, we don't always know the answer to that. Okay? There are some who have physical challenges for the husband or the wife, and they can go and get tests done and things, and we can pinpoint, hey, this is the issue, right? But not always. Sometimes people are, the plumbing works the way it's supposed to work. And some people, everything is normal, and yet they still are unable to conceive. Why is that? I don't know. We don't know the answers to that. This is a big issue, right? This is a big topic. But it's not the only one, okay? It's not the only topic it's not the only challenge that can come up in a marriage that's outside of anyone's control. What are some other ones?
It's my mom.
Okay, I offer free counseling to church members. I'm not going to ask you to elaborate. I think I should just observe the Passover on that and maybe just say, okay, let's get another one.
Well, to me, that is a serious thing, though. And I think.
Oh, it's serious. Yes.
But I mean, that is out of your control, and it can affect if you have ungodly in-laws, and you have in-laws that are against.
That's right.
Especially if you were the person that brought their son or daughter to the Lord.
Yeah.
It can affect.
Absolutely.
marriage. And it can
Absolutely.
affect the grandchildren and children.
Sure.
And
You didn't see the elbow that Julie gave Tim, though, right after that. She was like, what are you talking about? You love my mother.
But I mean, it can.
Sure. That's right. Absolutely. All right, Karen.
Health issues,
Health issues. Okay.
husband, wife, kids, whatever.
Right. A terminal diagnosis, something like that, it's completely outside of one's ability to do anything about. What else? Okay, yeah, husband gets laid off, right, through no fault of his own. Maybe just the plan is downsizing, he gets laid off. There's subsequent hardship that follows after that. I mean, you control the response to that, but you don't control the initial event itself. Okay, what else? Loss of a child. Yes, absolutely. Especially if it's due to one of these kinds of circumstances that, you have no control over, right? Or maybe they didn't either. Okay? What else? Yeah. Oh, okay. Some natural disaster of some kind, destroys your home and rebuilding your life is a difficult thing. Spiritually, are there some spiritual challenges that can come that are outside of our ability to control?
You have a child who decides to walk away from the Lord or from
Yeah.
your family.
Good. A wayward child. That's definitely a challenging one. That's you have an adult child who's made choices, and that's not the way you trained them, but they're adults, and they're going to do what they want to do. That is clearly a challenge. Okay. It's not just infertility. I know that's the example that we're looking at tonight in our lesson, but there's a lot of challenges that you can face in marriage that are outside your ability to control or have any great effect on. So let's think about all of those challenges that we just listed. Practically speaking, how do you deal with these things? What steps, what things do you do to deal with these? Do you see things in Hannah's story? Do you see things in other stories of the Bible? Do you know of things from men and women whom you've known and respected and how they dealt with these things? How do we deal with this? Prayer has to be at the top of the list, right? Hannah was repeatedly doing that. And prayer with an understanding that with the infertility issue, it may not end with God answering this prayer, yes, you can have a child. It may not. If it's the Lord's will, to Arlene's point, then this will happen or won't happen, right? Okay, Trudy? Okay, if there's a tragedy or a loss, especially, Trudy said you have to grieve. You have to have time to do that and go through that process. Absolutely. Okay, over here, somebody? No? Okay, Tim?
I was just going to add with the prayer piece, also praying together as a married couple.
Yeah. Yes, good. Okay, so the key concept, dependence on your mate and upon God are critical. We mentioned Hannah's faith and prayer. Her husband was a godly man, or from all indications we have in the chapter. How about this? Avoid drawing definite conclusions about the why question. Why didn't God give us a child? Why did this happen to me? Why did that happen to my spouse? Be careful there, right? I mean, there are so many things that God knows that I don't. And so I cannot ever definitively put my foot down and say, yep, that's exactly what God was doing. Or I don't know. And when you deal with these kinds of matters, I think we need to be careful about drawing definitive conclusions. Sarah?
Say, asking why doesn't change what happened.
Asking why doesn't change what happened. That's exactly right. And it's natural to ask, right? We want to wrap our head around it. We want to make sense of it. It's natural to do that. But we are not going to come up with a satisfactory answer, okay? here's the last thing, and then I'm going to, well, go ahead.
I have lived long enough to see a number of challenges in my life that I kind of thought, what's happening? This is not the path that I thought I would be on. And I found repeatedly that in time I can look back and say, oh, I see, and something better, I think, has come. I think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego standing there before the king saying, we will not bow down to your God, your idol. We don't know what God will do. He may save us from the furnace, but regardless of what he does, we will not bow
Yeah,
down.
yeah, that's good.
We can pray also, and we may not get an answer to this prayer, but if we are faithful to God, there is a reward for us that far exceeds anything that we could want in this world.
Yeah, yep, well said. Okay, and the last thing that I put up here was lean on your spouse and be supportive of each other. When you're going through a challenge together, you have to do it together. Well, you deal with it the way you want to, and I'll deal with it the way I want to. That's no good. You've got to deal with it together, okay? And whether or not Elkanah was the supportive man that he should have been, some say he was, some say he was not, regardless, we should be that. We should be the supportive spouse. Yes, Julie.
I was just going to add communicate, because I really thought this version says, whatever you think is best, Elkanah agreed. Stay here for now, and may the Lord help you keep your promise.
Mm-hmm.
And she had said, you go ahead. When he's weaned, I'll bring him. And they really communicated the plan together.
Yeah, okay. All right, David?
You mentioned earlier about a commentator commenting about the phrase, the Lord closed her womb.
Right.
That one possibility was that was in God's providence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this may be one of those times. And what comes to mind in a similar way to me is when God hardened Pharaoh's heart. What does that exactly mean? What does it mean that he closed her womb? Well, God had a plan for Pharaoh and his children. He had a plan later on for Hannah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether it's always for providence or
Yeah.
not, like you said, we don't know.
Right.
But I think this may be something.
Yeah, and I think the providence idea certainly has some credibility, because the story goes on. Hannah has Samuel, and then when he is weaned, she gives him over to Eli into the service of the house of God. Well, maybe 3 years prior, the timing wasn't right, and maybe other things were going on with Eli that it's one of the, we don't know. It's too hard to figure that out. As I've said before, God is playing chess while we all struggle to play checkers, right? Okay. If you've been married for any length of time, you've dealt with things that you did not bring into your marriage. You did not invite those things in. Some of the things, maybe we've talked about some of them tonight, you've dealt with them. Biblical couples dealt with these things too. And that's part of the reason we have these stories, so we can look at them, we can think about what they did, what they didn't do, and we can learn from it.